Thank you for introducing Valla. And many thanks to the other organizers, Anton and I believe Christian also for the workshop. I will talk about our recent experiments at Harvard, combining superconductivity and fractional quantum Hall. And let me first acknowledge my team members, my collaborators. This work has been jointly done with Yuval Ronen in Philip Kim's lab. Yuval will start his position at Weizmann next year. The supporting theory model has been set up by Hassan Shapurian and Ashwin Vishwanath. Hassan was at Microsoft in Santa Barbara, but I think he has moved on to his next position now. We have also extensively collaborated with Xiang Li, Jonathan Zaberman, and of course, Amir Yacobi. The heterostructures are graphene-based, encapsulated with boron nitride crystals, which are grown in National Institute for Material Science in Japan. I will get into the experimental details. The data I'll be presenting today are included in our archive posting from last year, and we revised it more recently. But I will also show results from the previous paper from our group for a more complete understanding. Let me immediately start by introducing the experimental system, which is a double graphite-gated graphene heterostructure. Double graphite geometry screens removed impurities and so increases the mobility. The resulting decrease of the magnetic field range for stabilizing fractions allows for simultaneous observation of superconductivity. The heterostructure is transparently coupled to a narrow niobium nitride superconducting electrode. Here, you can see the Andreev conductance enhancement of this geometry shown in the initial work. An important point is that the superconductor contact is realized by first partially etching the heterostructure from the top beyond the graphene, and then depositing the superconductor to the exposed graphene edge. This process results in a disordered interface without a well-defined edge termination, and Valley number is expected to be not conserved. Okay, this is very important, and some of the recent work, for example, from Antonio Manesco and Anton's paper, also highlights this. And the superconductor of choice is niobium nitride, as it withstands large magnetic fields. Its superconducting coherence length is found to be 50 nanometers at 8 Tesla in the initial work from our lab. The device is operated at large magnetic fields. Charges are injected from IX, the terminal up top, and drained from the superconductor in blue. The holes leaving the superconductor follow the dashed arrow and are detected at the voltage terminal VCAR. The normal leads are not visible here, but basically all the arms connect to normal leads, and they are either used as voltage probes or left floating. So there's only one drain. A negative Andreev signal develops at several integer and fractional states. The signal disappears at high temperatures related to the suppression of superconductivity around 8 Kelvin, which is the critical temperature of niobium nitride at 14 Tesla. In the inset, you see the characterization of a niobium nitride strip of identical geometry as the one coupled to the device. So this is measured on the same device. Here, the negative signal is shown for a larger magnetic field range. Negative signal is seen as a blue. The color scale is nonlinear to highlight the sign, basically. And the negative signal is visible for large ranges of magnetic fields once quantum Hall sets in. A comprehensive look on many integer fillings shows negative Carr signal, which consistently increases for lower fillings, but remains larger in amplitude than Rxx. So this is important to rule out bulk conduction. We then normalize the Carr voltage for each filling by their hole voltage and obtain Carr probability. We find similar probabilities for all integer fillings. This suggests presence of spin-orbit coupling, without which Carr is not possible in spin-polarized odd fillings. Carlo also mentioned this point. Basically, if you have spin polarization, the S-wave superconductor will not give you an Andreev reflection. Our calculations show that the pairing mechanism, so this is also an interesting point, the pairing mechanism for even and odd fillings are the same, considering an ideal interface. This is because edge modes pair with their own counter-propagating partner. So the edge mode of filling factor 1 pairs with the edge mode of filling factor 1, and the next higher edge mode of filling factor 2 pairs with, again, the filling factor 2, and basically the pairing is always a spin polarized channel. But this is considering an ideal interface. So the similarity in Carr probability that you see is limited to small energies, however. Increasing the bias voltage provides distinguishing features which are reproduced in the simulations. Simulations suggest that filling-dependent bias response is related to smaller fillings having edge modes closer to the superconductor, which then pair more strongly. Okay, here you can see in the simulation that the negative range of filling factor 2 and 6 are different. A noteworthy point here also is to highlight that the Carr probability in integer fillings is unaffected by magnetic field in this range. Here, the magnetic field changes from 2 to 4 Tesla, but the Carr probability remains constant. In few slides, I will show a larger magnetic field range, and we will see again this behavior of integer fillings. So this seems to be also consistent for larger magnetic field range. Next, we investigate the graphene superconductor interface. The top graphite gate is carved out by around 100 nanometers to prevent an electrical connection to the superconductor. Whereas the bottom gate is continuous, so it covers all around, and separated from the superconductor by the bottom boron nitride. Okay, there's a edge stop there, basically. The combination of top and bottom gates allows for tuning the density around this 100 nanometer region around the superconductor without affecting the filling in the bulk away from the region. Basically, this region is encapsulated by both gates. Okay. So in particle-like fractions, for example, 1/3 and 2/5, we find that the negative signal disappears when the density around the superconductor deviates from the electrostatically neutral condition. Okay, here it's seen as the 0. When one increases the density or decreases the density, negative signal disappears. So this is shown as the depletion case for decreasing density and the accumulation case for the increasing density. And the negative signal is present only in the neutral condition. In whole-like fractional states and integer states, the negative signal disappears only for decreasing density, for the depletion case. Increasing the density away from the neutral condition has virtually no effect in the measurement range. This difference could be related to details of the edge profiles for particle-like and whole-like fractional states. We have made a schematic in which we depict the relevant edge profiles based on the understanding gained from fractional quantum Hall experiments in the past decade, maybe a bit longer. We also include the potentially present residual edge modes around the superconductor formed by contact-induced doping related to a Fermi level mismatch. So this is expected in the device because the Fermi levels are very different in niobium nitride and graphene, and there can be such doping. This is, of course, unintentional, but it may be very difficult to avoid this in this kind of geometry. These residual edge modes are shown as dashed gray lines. The lowest integer edge mode corresponding to filling 1 is shown in green, and the 1/3 edge mode is shown in orange. It is straightforward to see that depletion by gates should suppress the signal. Basically, then the edge mode doesn't efficiently see the superconductor, and the signal will be suppressed. So I will not focus on that case. I will just blank it. So let's first look at the case of bulk filling 1. Here, the incoming charges are carried by the integer edge. For the case of 2/3 bulk filling, again, the incoming charges are carried by an integer edge, similar to the case of bulk filling 1. This situation is different for the case of particle-like 1/3 filling. Here, the incoming charges are carried by the fractional edge. These details may hold a clue as to why particle-like fractions are different than the rest of the fillings, but also maybe reveal other interesting features. For example, if we compare the edge state configuration for the neutral and the accumulation regimes of 1/3, and also considering the observed suppression of CAR in the accumulated regime, could suggest that the residual edges are fully proximity gapped and maybe can be seen as part of the superconductor. Basically, the lack of a signal in the accumulation regime suggests that the equilibration between 1 and 1/3 is incomplete, but then the situation is similar in the neutral case, for which there is a CAR signal. Another finding is that particle-like fractions show stronger cross-Andreev reflection, CAR, and depend on magnetic field. Varying the magnetic field does not affect the integer fillings and the whole-like fractions, but particle-like fractions show CAR probabilities up to 10% in some cases for certain magnetic fields. So we also made an inset. So this inset shows the magnetic field evolution of CAR probabilities for several fillings. Also here, we see that CAR probability does not depend on magnetic field in the integer fillings and whole-like fractions in this range of 4 to 9 Tesla. And this probability remains around 1%. And the particle living, if particle-like filling 1/3, however, shows a strong dependence at large fields in the right-hand side, reaching around 10%. So let's move to the temperature-dependent measurements, which also suggest some differences between particle-like fractions and the rest of the fillings. Two types of temperature dependence are possible in a fractional filling, in a fractional edge, based on our Luttinger liquid analysis. A fractional charge pairing converts the fractionally charged quasiparticles to fractionally charged holes. In this case, the negative Andreev signal is expected to increase in amplitude as the temperature is decreased. Such a temperature dependence is not expected in the alternative scenario of an integer charge pairing, which converts integer charges to integer holes. In this case, the fractional charges bunch to an integer charge before being Andreev reflected, and the negative signal vanishes for the decreasing temperature. Comparing this temperature dependence of particle-like fractions to the integers and whole-like fractions highlights the differences. Integer and whole-like fillings have a small but non-zero CAR, which saturates at low temperatures, different from the particle-like fractional fillings. This saturating temperature dependence is, however, noteworthy in itself because the very low car probability suggests decoherence processes as the dominant suppression mechanism. But below 4 Kelvin, there is no strong temperature dependence. So this is an open question. So we have done control experiments to pinpoint the physical mechanism of the observed negative signal. In the first control experiment, we have fabricated a device with a narrow gold electrode as the drain. This device shows a positive non-local signal for both integer fillings at high magnetic fields, and there is no temperature dependence. In the second experiment, the narrow superconducting electrode is replaced with a wide electrode. Also here, there is no negative signal. In this case, the signal is effectively zero below the superconducting transition temperature around 9 Kelvin. We can also remark that there are no oscillations or fluctuations in the non-local signal in this magnetic field range, and for the interface length around 1.5 micrometers in this case for niobium nitride superconductor. These points will be extensively discussed in the next talk, but we just it may be useful the features there's different features in the more or less similar geometry. And finally, we have varied the length of the narrow superconducting electrode, keeping its width the same, around 100 nanometers. In both devices, the integer fillings produce similar car probabilities, around 1%. All these experiments combined suggest an induced pairing mechanism responsible for the negative signal. But this is up for a debate in the discussion section. Some remarks may be in order related to the low car probabilities. In our experiments, car is at most 10%, and integer fillings show around 1% probability. In the ideal case, the car probability is 100% unity, basically, related to topological constraints. Okay, this is basically the topological superconductivity explanations. We have calculated, we have included a disordered pairing potential in our calculations. Okay, basically the only difference from left, the simulation of ideal and the simulation of disordered case, is a disordered pairing potential. It simulates or similar to the disorder expected in the experimental case. And this reduces car probability. This order switches on direct tunneling, which is not possible in the ideal case because it corresponds to left mover tunneling to the right mover along the superconductor. This process does not conserve momentum and only allowed when this order is present, which is the experimentally realistic scenario. The coherence processes, such as vortices in the superconductor, further decrease the probability. Another noteworthy feature here is that the positive signal at large energies is due to direct tunneling. Car signal never changes sign in the ideal case. Let me quickly flash one slide very quickly about the potential future experiments. One experiment is to detect tunneling signatures of superconductivity and potentially of a zero mode localized at the tip of the superconductor. Another set of experiments are noise measurements. Noise measurements can reveal the charge of the Andreev reflected holes. And if found fractional, this could be an indication for fractional charge pairing. However, if the measured charge is integer, this would mean that the edge state at the superconductor interface is effectively an integer edge. It's not a fractional edge. A Fermi level mismatch could potentially result in such an observation. This brings me to the conclusion. A highlight of the presented experiments is the observation of integer filling factor independent car signal. And particle-like fractional states can show a strong car signal with a non-saturating temperature dependence, unlike other fillings. Thank you for your attention.